Hi, everyone. We are here at the Scholastic Graphix panel. My name is Carli Spina, and I'm here with Megan Peace, the editor, Phil Falco, creative director, and Jonah Newman, assistant editor. And we're going to be asking them some questions, and you can feel free to put any questions you might have in the comments as well. So thank you all for being here. To get us started today, I just wanted to start by saying, how did you come to work at Scholastic Graphix? And Megan, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. I ended up getting started at Scholastic Graphix. I started off working for Scholastic Press. I was actually hired as an editorial assistant to support on Dave Pilkey's books. And then from there, more time at the company, more responsibilities. I got to build my own list and then got to build specifically on the graphics list. So after a number of years at the company, I think I've been with graphics since 2017, 2016, that I've got to build my own list in there.
Great. Phil, do you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you got your start?
Oh, I started working at Scholastic in 2005, and it was in a completely different area, the trade division. I was in licensing, and I worked on titles like Star Wars and things like that. And after about 2 years, I ended up moving over to the fiction group, doing hardcover designs. And then at the time, there was an opening in graphics because the designer who had been working on it with David in the beginning had left and moved on to another job. And he was like, oh, yeah, I have this small imprint, we'll do like a book or so a season. Would you be interested in doing it? And it was, I loved graphic novels from when I was a kid. And actually, when I interviewed with David for the job in licensing, he had just published Bone, the first installment of Jeff Smith's Bone. And I was going through, I was like, oh, I used to read this as a kid. I can't believe it's in color now. This is fantastic. And, I was always into it. So it was a good fit. And, over the years, as graphics became more and more successful, I ended up, going from doing, 20% of my job to doing 80 graphics. And now it's all graphics all the time. And so now I'm the creative director of the imprint. And really enjoy my job. And,
Great.
Yeah, that's about it.
Jonah?
Yeah, so I started working at Scholastic in 2018, and sort of like actually both of my colleagues, I wasn't working on graphic novels right away. I was hired as an editorial assistant for picture books and younger nonfiction. But my boss, Ken Geist, is Dave Pilkey's editor. So a few months after I started, he asked me to help out with the Dogman and Captain Underpants series and the rest of Dave Pilkey's publishing. And he also asked me to help with a younger graphic novel series called Bun Bun and Bon Bon, the first installment of which actually came out earlier this fall. So those were my first two graphic novel series I was working on. And since then, I've started working on an increasing number of graphics titles, including the recently announced Leon the Extraordinary series, which will be coming to graphics in 2022.
Great. So my next question is, what gets you the most excited about a pitch or a project that you're working on? Jonah, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there are a few different things for me. There's the original voice that pops off the page with a lot of personality and heart. A strong sense of humor is a big plus too in kids' books because kids love to laugh. That's part of why Dave Pilkey is so successful, because he's so funny. So those are things that would be flagged for me. I also think that a solid understanding of the comics medium is something that I personally look for, and probably most graphic novel editors do. Just because comics is a specific medium with specific rules, and you want to make sure that the creator knows how to tell a story visually in the comics medium and knows how to pace it, make sure that the flow is all there. And then, of course, amazing artwork, impressive artwork. I think at graphics, we have sort of a range of different styles that we look for, but there are also some visual styles that aren't necessarily what we're looking for. I think if it looks too adult, or maybe too overly sophisticated or detailed or photorealistic, it's not necessarily going to be something that we go for. So if the art is really impressive and it sort of is in the range of styles that we're looking for, and then the writing and the storytelling are there, those are the things for me that if I see those in a pitch, I start to get really excited.
Great. Megan, how about you?
For me, if the story is unpredictable, I think that's something that really gets to me. Maybe if it has some bits of familiarity, like just to connect to the story in some way, but ultimately being something that I've never seen before, I think that's very exciting. Having really rich characterization is also something that gets to me, that really I get excited about. For me, I think story trumps everything, but at the same time, I think if you have just compelling art, but the story could use, I'm sorry, my dog is playing with a squeaky toy. If you have a story that has, if the art is very compelling, but the story can still like use a bit of work, I'd be more than happy to do whatever it takes to get the story to the caliber that the art is at. But yeah, those are the things that stand out for me. And kind of like what Jonah said about the humor. I think right now with like so much of the world being so doom and gloom and dark, I personally right now am definitely on the look for funny stories. I want to provide readers with books that gives them a chance to escape the realities of the world and have like a moment of a laugh. I think that humor is more important now than ever before.
Great. And Phil, I know you were saying that you don't necessarily work as much at the pitch stage, but what gets you excited about projects that you're working on?
Oh, well, the whole creative process, I guess. A lot of my job is, building the way the book is going to be presented to the world through the cover and the design, and making sure everything feels like a unified package, essentially. So that's what really excites me, and really, building impressive designs and trying to make things stand out in the market, especially now that graphic novels are so popular, and it's a really growing industry. So it's going to be tougher and tougher to stand out. So that's what I really enjoy doing, and working with the artist on different ideas, and not only artists but colorists and letterers, and like really coordinating the whole thing. It's a lot of fun. So that's what excites me.
Cool.
And stresses me out at the same time. It's a lot of work.
I'm sure coordinating those big teams of lots of different folks.
Yep. Yeah.
I can't even believe what Phil keeps track of. It's insane. He's got so many different books.
Yeah, it's just like a glass of water, Jonah. I just empty out all the other important information. I can remember only dates and other deadlines for work, but.
So I think maybe that's a good segue. So if you're saying about how there's a growth in the industry, so what are you seeing as the most important trends as it does sort of become more and more popular?
I guess I can speak to that a little bit. The first age group to really blow up in graphic novel publishing was middle grade. So 8 to 12 years old is what we classify as middle grade. And I think the battle has sort of been won in that age group. There are just so many graphic novels out there that appeal to that age group. But the recent trends have been more and more graphic novels on either side of that category. This particular year actually has seen a lot of younger graphic novel series pop up from a host of different publishers. And you're also seeing a lot of really fierce competition for young adult graphic novels. So, for 12 to 18. A lot of these situations have gotten really competitive with a lot of publishers bidding on these books. So the number of publishers and the number of agents working on graphic novels has expanded recently, and and the age groups have expanded, the genres have expanded, I would say. So there's just more graphic novels out there than ever before, and I think that they're reaching new readers that graphic novels up till now haven't been targeting all too often.
Phil or Megan, are you seeing any other trends that you think are important?
Oh, I guess I could go. I mean, I can look at, like I was saying, I was a huge comic fan from when I was a kid in the 80s, and the market's really expanded a lot, because it used to be like the kind of the more the misfits were were in the comic books, but now it's like all kids read comic books and graphic novels. I still use the old terms, but and it's that readership has expanded, and it's opened itself up to having more like slice of life stories. That's shown to have been a huge driver for, a lot of the sales out there, like, the Raina Telgemeier books and Invisible Emmy, I think it is. And, there's tons of stories out there, and it's really great because kids have a lot of different choices. And it's not just superhero stories or like kind of odd, like more, I still love those stories personally, but, it doesn't appeal to all kids and all people. So I think there's like a lot more variety out there, which is really great.
Great.
I think that there's just regularly been consistency in trends with the contemporary realistic stories. I don't think those are going to be going anywhere anytime soon with both female and male protagonists. And as Jonah had said, discussing like the different ages that we're seeing now being created for graphic novels. But I would also say like the hard thing about trends too is that people have a tendency to chase them. And by the time you're chasing them, you're kind of too late to the trend. So that's the hard thing about trends.
Definitely. So can you tell us, sort of to the point of it's already the end of the trend by the time you go through the process, can you tell us a little bit about how books move from that pitch stage to script to the bookshelf and what the key stops along the way are?
Sure. So when we get a submission, we take a look at it. And if it's something that an individual editor like myself or Jonah would like, we would escalate it to the people that we report to, our editorial director, our publisher, see if they're also on board with it. If they are, then it's something we bring to acquisitions. If we get the green light from acquisitions, then we make our offer and then say it's accepted. And then from there we work on shaping the synopsis. And the thing about a graphic novel, all creators put together their projects in completely different ways, especially if it's a single author illustrator or a separate author illustrator. Like those two processes are totally different. But if it is a single author illustrator, then we would really, map out the story. And then once that's settled, then the creator would go on to creating sketches of the story. And then once the sketches are approved, then they'll move on to inks, then they'll move on to coloring. If there is a colorist on board, Phil would work there, and he would work on sending the inks out to flatters or colorists. He could speak more to that. But once we have the complete mechanical laid out, which is something that Phil would create, then that routes through editorial, production, copy editing, back to design. Then we go through many rounds of that process until we get everything spick and span and nice and clean. And then we would release the files, review proofs, get galleys out for publicity needs and corporate events, BEA and all that kind of stuff. And then the book would be in the store. And then that's where our marketing and publicity team really push the book as well.
Okay. And Phil, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your piece of the process?
Sure. So yeah, I come into it, I guess, after the book is acquired, and we begin it depends. Every book is different. I guess the main thing is let's say, right now we're working on the fall 2021 list, and it's always we're working years ahead of time. So by the time the book is out in the store, it feels really old to me, at least. I'm like, oh yeah, that was months ago. It feels like years. But we'll work with the artist on, cover directions and cover sketches, and we'll look to see, what kind of book it is and what the competition is, and, kind of try to break away from what's out there in some cases. In other cases, you need to steer a little closer to what's out there to kind of feel relevant. It's tricky, like Megan was saying, with trends. You don't want to, stick too close to that line of thinking because you'll kind of trap yourself, I feel like. But yeah, and then, you're working on the book and you have a colorist team set up and, coloring. Sometimes there's a separate letterist and you have kind of everything happening at once, and it all hopefully comes together in the end for the final product of the book, And yeah, it's usually I'd say every book is a 6-month process. It depends. some of the fall season is actually a little more contracted. It's like 5 months, 4 months between from when the cover goes out in the world and ends up on Amazon and everything, and then when final files released to the printer. So yeah, but it's every book is different.
And I'll
Go ahead.
yeah, I want to emphasize that there are always so many people involved with the process of making a graphic novel, and we sort of have different workloads depending on where the book is in its life. So I would say editors do, I would say, most of the heavy lifting early on, because we're working with the artist or the author to shape their story. We're looking at things like story and character development and dialogue and pacing, especially when we're in the script and or sketch stage. And different creators work in different ways, but when things are very rough and malleable is when the editors like me and Megan tend to be sort of putting in our longest hours to give them feedback on their story as it shapes up. And once they move into the creating the final art, then Phil and his team really get heavily involved to make sure that the files are set up in the right way for print. If there's a colorist on board, as Phil mentioned, or a letterer, that gets brought in at that stage. And then basically when the book is done or close to done, sales and marketing and publicity and all of those teams start to get on board to let people know that the book is coming, to advertise it, to secure reviews and interviews for the creator, and to make sure that booksellers and retailers and librarians and everyone who might want the book is aware of it and is able to get copies. So by the time the book actually hits the bookshelves and its publication date, there have been probably dozens of people who have been involved in making it happen. So it's a really collaborative process. It's a really fun process. And it's super rewarding when a book finally is done, knowing that a lot of people can kind of claim credit for it, I guess, and be proud of it. So.
I just wanted to chime in real quickly too. I know I had went into detail on the author/illustrator process, but for author submissions, we would usually receive a full script from an author for consideration. And then if that's something that we pull on board, then editorial would work very closely with Phil and his other designers to seek out potential illustrators for projects. And then we would approach an illustrator to, share that manuscript with them, say, like, is this something that you're on board with? We might, if there's a couple of people that we're considering, we might ask for sample sketches from those illustrators and then share those, consider them ourselves. And if we're kind of on board with any of them, then share them with the author as well, for the author to take a look and say, oh, I really like this person most, or number 1, 2, 3, or something like that.
Great. That actually leads well into one of the questions from the audience, which is someone was asking, how open are you to a team with a writer and an artist coming in as a team as opposed to a solo author artist or an author giving you the opportunity to pick the artist?
We have by teams. I personally have not done that, but a colleague of mine, I know 2 titles that she has that she's acquired like that. So it's not something that we have a blanket statement saying that we're opposed to that. I think that if the project is very strong, then we would certainly consider it.
Okay, great. Another question.
Yeah,
go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
Sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say I agree, and I know there's some, people that they think just one creator, it's the best way to do a book, but sometimes it is better to have a collaborative process, and having a separate author and a separate artist, like the artist will bring things to the table that the author didn't think to do, especially in graphic novel form, and it's really great. Like when it's a good team, it really can create a really great product. We've done that a few times. Like there was a World War II series called Dogs of War that Sheila Keenan was the author and Nathan Fox did the illustrations, and he really brought a lot to it and a lot of historical accuracy that he put into it, and it took a long time, but it really turned out great. And there's a new book coming from Michelle Nutter, and I'm blanking on the author name, so I can't. Megan, do you remember?
Is it Megan Wagner Lloyd?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and that's coming out soon.
Please forgive me for not getting the name correct. I'm so embarrassed. I'm sorry.
Your memory's better than mine, so. But yeah, we just wrapped up that book, and it's really beautiful. And the 2 individuals brought different visions to it. It's came together great.
Great. And then a question that also sort of fits in well with this is, someone asked in the audience, how would someone that's not already working with a publisher submit a pitch to you? Do you require an agent, or are there submissions blind, or how does that process work?
We can accept unagented submissions. We don't, as far as I understand, we don't have a rule saying that we only accept agented submissions. We have, I know I am working on a series right now where the author illustrator is not agented. So we do accept those projects as well.
Okay, great. So what?
But I think, oh, sorry to interrupt. I think like a cold, unsolicited submission that doesn't come through an agent is less likely to succeed. I think that, you know, ideally you should want to have some sort of connection to the person that you're pitching to, and, you know, run the idea by them, ask them if it's okay to submit, rather than just going ahead and submitting. You know, I think that's more about courtesy than any sort of rule. But Megan's right. I mean, we do work with agented people and we work with unagented people, but you know, I think you have to be careful to not just like send something out of the blue without context or anything like that. So I guess if it was even something like, hey, I saw you speak at the panel at Diversity Comic Con, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to take a look at my graphic novel, which is about this and that. And then, you know, if one of us says, sure, send it over, then you can do so, if that makes sense.
Great. And so then we have a couple questions from the audience that sort of go along with how do you go about sending in a draft or a submission, and what sort of gets included in that submission process, whether it is agented or unagented?
If it is an author-only project, I would like to see the entire script completely written out. And so that is what the author should be submitting for submission. If it is an author/illustrator project, I recommend having a detailed synopsis, as well as, I know it's a big number, but it would be great to have about 20 pages of art, a mix of final full color art as well as inks/sketches. The more stuff that we receive up front, the easier it is for us to push the project through at acquisitions, because people can see what they're getting. So that sample art would be, many times it's the first pages of the graphic novel, which is helpful. So it'll be like a sample chapter, something like that. But that's always really helpful to have.
Great.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with that. I think it's really important if you're either an author, illustrator, or part of a team that includes an illustrator, to see some actual comics pages. Like character artwork and then a synopsis is not usually enough, just because we need to see if you understand the comics medium, you know, and know how to tell a story through sequential images. So that's a super important part of the pitch, if you know you already have the illustrator side of the project on board while pitching.
Great. And another question from the audience, do you have advice for people who are looking to secure an agent?
I would say there are a few different ways to go about it. Almost every agent will accept unsolicited submissions. So actually you can just cold call them by email and say, I have a graphic novel idea, I'm seeking representation. You know, make sure to go to their website and read their submission guidelines really carefully and follow them, because if you don't, you probably won't even get looked at. But you can just straight up reach out to them, and you know, they often take a while to go through their submissions, but that's something you can do. And in terms of like finding an agent who might be a fit for you, I think it's helpful to figure out who represents creators that you admire, because those people might be looking, they might not be open to additional clients, but they might be. You know, and if you're doing something similar to a client they already have, I think that they're more likely to take you on as a new client. I also think a great resource to find people is Publishers Weekly has deal announcements that are public, that they announce twice a week. So you can either sign up for their children's bookshelf newsletter and get sort of the roundup of deal announcements each week and see if there are any graphic novels happening, and if so, who was the agent that made that happen. Or you can just search on Publishers Weekly's website And that will, I think, give you a good sense of who the agents are that are working in this space right now. And then you can find them online, and follow their submissions guidelines and see what happens.
Great, thanks.
And I would just add to that, just to make sure you're submitting to someone who has those shared sensibilities that you have, as Jonah said, kind of do your research on them. If you are writing sci-fi fantasy, do not just submit to an agent who specifies that they're not interested in sci-fi fantasy. It'll just be a waste of your efforts and their time. So it's better to narrow your focus, really go for the agents that don't just cast like a wide net, like really go for someone who seems like a great match for you. Maybe reach out to 5 agents at first, see if anyone's on board with that. If for some reason you didn't find a match, reach out to 5 more. But then I wouldn't say like reach out to 30 agents at one time. I would narrow your search.
Great. So that was a lot of really helpful information for creators, but what advice would you have for those who are interested in working in the comics publishing industry?
Maybe I can start with this one because I sort of joined the comics publishing industry the most recently. I think that learning and networking are 2 of the best things you can do. For learning, I mean, going to panels like this one is a really good start, and going to other panels and other events and other talks, listen to podcasts, read news articles online. I mentioned Publishers Weekly already, but like the Comics Beat and ICV2 are 2 other websites that I think offer a lot of really good comics and graphic novel news. Read as many kids' graphic novels as you can, figure out what sort of stuff is being published these days, and what's selling well and what's being well reviewed. And just really like learn as much as you can about this space and this industry, and then reach out to people as much as you can and ask for informational interviews. I mean, that's actually why I'm working at Scholastic. I reached out to Megan over 2 years ago, and she was kind enough to get coffee with me, and we grabbed coffee. We had a great conversation, and then like a few months after that, she thought of me when an editorial assistant position opened at Scholastic, and I applied and I got it, and so I'm super grateful to her and having made that connection. So I think you can't really. It's hard to go wrong if you learn enough that you know what you're talking about. When you get in a room with somebody who might be able to help you professionally, you want to sort of show that you're enthusiastic and qualified and knowledgeable. And then, you can never control what happens when you apply for a job or when there's an opening, but you're going to put yourself in a good position if you have connections and you have knowledge.
Great. Phil, do you want to talk maybe a little bit from the creative director point of view about getting into that side of the business?
Oh, and design. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I kind of had it was like a wavy path to get into publishing. I always loved publishing. I loved books. When I graduated from Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, and there weren't many publishers, I actually interviewed at a small book publisher in Philadelphia called Running Press, and I interviewed. There were a lot of advertising firms, and I ended up, between the 2 jobs, I ended up going into advertising, which I quickly regretted. And I did that for like 2 years, and I was like, I just couldn't stand it. It wasn't much fun, and it was just a weird industry. And I was kind of more into like, I don't know, books and kids entertainment, I guess. And I remember a friend of mine, like Jonah and Megan were saying, that I graduated from school with, was working in New York, and I'd wanted to move to New York. And she knew somebody at Nickelodeon, I believe her name was Teresa Fitzgerald, who really wanted to hire Tyler students. She liked Tyler portfolios, and so I went into New York, interviewed there, and I ended up working in the kind of like the style guide division. Like I worked on stuff like Danny Phantom and Avatar, some SpongeBob stuff, because everybody worked on SpongeBob back then, Dora the Explorer, and it was fun. But I still wanted to do books, and like one of the reasons I took that job was it was, style guides were books back then. Like now they're just like PDFs that people get mailed on a USB thumb drive, but you would actually create these little books, and that would go out to like licensors, and they would be inspired by it and then create merchandise based on it. But, you know, I wasn't that happy there, and I ended up interviewing at Scholastic. And my experience at Nickelodeon working on those licensed properties kind of gave me a way in at Scholastic. And I learned basically how to make books there, in that division. And then eventually I moved up to, being in the graphics group. But it's weird. I feel really fortunate that I had those opportunities, but I guess just kind of follow what you really want to do, and make those connections, and don't turn your, because I feel like a lot of people they wouldn't have taken the job in licensing because it's not as creative. But my having that job in licensing taught me how to work really fast, and it taught me how to be organized. And I made mistakes along the way, but you could in some ways, because some of those licensed books are only out for 3 or 4 months. That's their lifespan on the shelf, and you can do it. And it really made me a better designer. And so don't let's say you wanted to work at Marvel as a creative director or a designer at Marvel. You can't just say, well, that's all I want to do ever. You have to learn other disciplines. And some of the things that I learned in, I remember I worked in advertising when I was doing stuff for Comcast Sports Center. I have no interest in sports, but I learned how to make those flashy, ESPN style graphics. And then I had worked on this hardcover series called Game Changers, I think it was. And I had to make all those graphics. And I remember the editor was really impressed. He's like, "Oh, wow, this looks like ESPN or something." And I was like, "Yeah, I used to do this kind of stuff." And I hated doing it, but that experience really helped with this. And my nephew, he's a big sports guy, and he couldn't believe it. He's like, "Wow, this looks great. You hate sports? You hate football?" He's like, "I can't believe you did a good job on this." But yeah, so you never know where those little different influences will kind of feed into your career. So
I think the only thing I would add is just be tenacious. Don't quit. If you have your heart set on something, put all of your energy into making it happen. Remain focused, remain connected, remain informed, but just don't give up on it, because it will come your way.
Great. Somewhat of a similar question, but a little bit of a different approach to it. What's the best advice you were given when you were starting on your career path? Is there any advice in your career that really stuck with you?
Okay, I guess I'll go again. So I was, in addition to being an editor, I'm actually a cartoonist as well, and I was sort of trying to be a cartoonist first, and it was only through kind of trying to figure out how to publish my own book that I started to learn more about the industry and become interested in it in a professional capacity, and realizing that I would want for my full-time job to be working in publishing. But back when I was a lonely cartoonist, I was just drawing this thing in my bedroom by myself every day. And I was getting dinner with a friend, and I was sort of complaining about feeling isolated, feeling like I was working really hard and I had no idea if it would matter, if the book was any good. And he's like, "Well, why don't you go meet some people? Why don't you show your work to them and talk to them? And maybe that would help you feel less isolated." And that was actually really great advice, because that, for me, sort of kicked off my journey of starting to learn a lot more about the publishing industry, and make those connections and start to sort of embed myself in the community. And I've only made more and more connections over the course of the last several years, because it's really hard to go at it alone. I think you need to open yourself up to other people, and be willing to maybe even step outside your comfort zone a little bit, in order to take the next step in your career. It's even though there are a lot of ways to self-publish comics these days, which I think is a great thing. You don't need a publisher to publish your comics or to share them with people. But I still think that connections and other people are really important for advancing your career. And so that's why I'm super grateful to my friend who doesn't work in comics for that really great piece of advice.
Great. Megan or Phil, do either of you have any other advice?
I feel like the woman who had hired me at Scholastic imparted so much wisdom and sage advice on me for years, and I have just absorbed it all like a sponge, but I feel like I can't isolate any single bit of advice that she gave me. It was just I feel like I got a PhD in publishing, like learning from her, learning so much. So I honestly couldn't isolate any single thing because I've received so much great advice in publishing or about publishing from her.
Well, then maybe part of it is just finding a mentor who can really sort of help you to have that sort of successful path.
That's a great way, actually, of phrasing that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I could say like I don't know if I feel like yeah, it's like a combined experience, but like when you're in an industry like this, like you have to learn how to work together as a team, and that's the most important thing is collaboration. It's like I feel like all of us, you know, at graphics, like we work really well, and that's one of the most important things. Is like it's never a one person show, you know, and that's kind of like especially when like, and I see this with, you know, artists graduating from school, they want to like, they're like, this is my vision and this is the way it's going to be. And, you know, I was like that to some degree when I graduated as a designer, because you have like this like inflated, you know, feeling that like you're going to change everything. But, you know, it's a group effort. It really is. And you need to, you know, learn how to collaborate, I guess. And that's something I've learned just from being in the industry for this long. That's probably the most important thing.
Great.
Yeah,
So,
totally agree with what Phil said, like not being precious and being really open to feedback and sometimes very harsh feedback, you know? Like I remember like when someone looked at my comics several years ago and said some very harsh things, I was very upset about it, but I moved on. I corrected some of those things. You know, I continued to seek feedback even though it's hard, and you know, it takes a lot of practice and hard work to get better at anything, whether you're a creator or a professional, and you're definitely going to make mistakes early on. But if you're humble and you're open to people basically telling you that you could be doing better, and then you're able to adapt and change your behavior in that very collaborative, teamwork-minded sort of way, you know, it's not really all about you. I think that wasn't a specific piece of advice I ever got, but that was something really important that I think I've learned.
great. So another question from the audience. They ask, were you guys fans of superhero comics growing up? And if so, how do you feel about working with children's comics as opposed to with the more traditional superhero comics?
Oh, I was a fan. I still have a big collection that I'm carrying around like a chain around my neck that I need to get rid of someday. They're stored at my sister's house, thankfully. I mean, honestly, like I was into the superhero stuff when I was like, you know, middle school and into high school. And then I kind of lost interest, and then I got interested again. I remember when I moved to New York, actually, because I was working at Nickelodeon, it was right in Midtown, and there was I think it's Midtown Comics. I used to go there like on Wednesdays, and I got into it again. And then I kind of got out of it. And yeah, I don't know. I don't miss it really at all. Every once in a while I'll read a superhero thing, but I really like, you know, that comics have, you know, changed a lot, and there's a lot of different stories out there. Like, and I was kind of more into that, like when I was in college, like I'd read like Daniel Clowes stuff, 8-Ball, and like more of the independent stuff, like all Neil Gaiman's books I was into, and Vertigo and things like that. But I don't mind it at all. I actually really like, you know, working on these middle grade books because it's reaching such an audience. And also like my nephews, they're growing up now, they're in high school, but you know, to see how excited they are about these books that I work on, it's incredible. Like I remember like giving my nephew Lucas, when he must have been 8 or something, I brought him like a stack of books that hadn't come out yet. And it was around Christmas, and like I was like, oh, hey Lucas, how you doing? And he was like, what do you got? And he like grabbed the books out of my hand, and he immediately jumped into a chair and started reading it. It's really great. It makes you feel like you're doing something really, really important, because those stories are going to stick with these kids for the rest of their lives. So I don't really miss it, to be honest. I mean, maybe we'll do a superhero comic someday, and I would hope we would bring something different, you know, than what's being, because Marvel and DC kind of got their thing going on, and you know, they're doing a good job of it, I guess.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family that just adored comic books. I mean, my dad was an early collector. He had like Spider-Man #1, but I think he sold it at some time in college, like foolishly. So I remember my dad taking me and my older brother to, we grew up in the Chicago suburbs, and there was this comic book store called Graham Crackers. It was on the second floor of this building in like the downtown area of our town. And it was awesome. I have just great memories of going there. But I don't miss that kind of stuff in terms of working on things. I think the stories that we are working on now have, I think they're sharing stories that I just relate to better and connect with more. And I think I'm not discounting like superhero comics in any way, but I think I'm just, I have a stronger emotional attachment to the kind of graphic novel books that are coming out now. And I think that they're super influential in like readers' lives, which is great to be a part of.
I was never a big fan of superhero comics growing up, you know, which I think is kind of rare for someone who loves comics so much. But I sort of started with graphic novels right away, almost like they were like the first comics that I read and really loved, like the holy trinity of Mouse, Persepolis, and Fun Home, which was sort of like the canonical like graphic memoir trilogy that I think most people have heard of and have read. You know, that like paved the path forward in a lot of ways for graphic novels as a medium. Like those were books that I read in high school, and that really lit me up and you know, made me excited about the comics medium overall. Like the depth and nuance of those books, and you know what the comics medium can do and the emotional ground it can cover was so thrilling for me. You know, so I continued to read graphic novels, and those are all like young adult or above graphic novels. I think mainly they're pitched to adults, even though a lot of kids read them, especially in classrooms. But then from there, I sort of discovered that kids comics were such a thing. You know, and a lot of what Phil especially has done at Graphix, because he's like been around since the beginning, carving out that new space for kids comics has been super cool to watch. And now like kids comics are leading the way in terms of the industry overall. You know, if you look at the sales numbers of series like Dogman or books like Raina Telgemeier, you know, or Shannon Hale's Real Friends series at First Second, like these books are just reaching such an incredible number of readers. And that's just really cool to see. So yeah, I think superhero comics, I got nothing against them, but it wasn't how I grew up reading comics. And so, yeah, it's really cool to see graphic novels as a format being so successful after, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, the first time I read one. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I think that leads pretty well into the next question from the audience, which is that, you know, thinking about what YA and children's graphic novels can do as a format, somebody asked the question, YA sure goes to some dark places, but what's too dark? Will you consider some pitches that go too far? And then if so, do you sort of talk graphic novelists into adapting that into something that's maybe a little bit more friendly for the audience you're going for? Or how does that process work?
I just recently worked with an author who did have a pretty dark pitch. It had great art. Conceptually, the story was amazing, but there were some points of it that were just kind of dark. But the discussion was that they just didn't fit well with the overall story that she was telling. It's not like trying to clean away or wipe away or wash away the author's intended story, but just trying to pull out the richest story possible from the author. And in some cases, some of that darker stuff just might not be necessary. So yes, we can work with authors to pull out the best story possible. And if some of those darker tones are essential to the story, we do have stories that have darker themes in them. We would certainly not get rid of that just because.
I do know that violence is a pretty tough thing for Scholastic specifically. You know, we do publish books for teens, but you know, like extreme violence or graphic violence or, you know, guns especially is something I've heard, like you don't really want to have those in, or, you know, Scholastic overall doesn't really want to have that. You know, we do publish graphic novels based on Lauren Tarshiss's I Survive series, and a lot of those real historical events that she's depicting are quite violent. But, you know, I mean, I think it depends mostly on how graphic it is and whether we feel like it has educational potential. But just because Scholastic is, you know, we have such a tight relationship with schools and libraries around the country, you know, and we try to have a really broad reach and get into a lot of different schools, especially. So I think like we you know, we have to maintain a relatively family friendly list, even if we do cover more mature, sophisticated themes. But I think it has to be done gently and well. You know, and it really is all about execution, as Megan alluded to.
So I have a couple of questions that I think go together well from the audience, which are about format. So we have one question about the format you're looking for in the script, and we have another question about the format that you're looking for when it comes to like the fully finished script with the artwork, whether you want that to be sort of digital or what programs you like to work with for the submission of the digital artwork. So that sort of formatting piece, if you could speak a little bit about that, both for the script and the art, that'd be great.
I can speak to the script. I'll let Phil speak to the art stuff. But with the script, it's great if it comes to us as either a Word document or a PDF. And if it's an author only, as I said earlier, have it be the complete script. If it's, was part of your question about what an author illustrator package should look like?
Yeah, that too, what a package like that would be formatted as.
Yeah, so that packet, I would recommend sending that as a PDF as well. Have the complete synopsis typed up and included into that pitch packet. I would start it off by having your title page, then immediately your sequential art, and then with the full synopsis after that. I think that's the best way to present it. So when you see the PDF and you open it, it's like you're opening the first pages of the book. So I think it's just more effective.
Great.
And
yeah. Sorry, Jim.
Just another word on scripts. Like there isn't really a standard style for comic scripts in the way that there is for, say, film scripts. You know, and I don't think we're necessarily super picky about the format or the layout of the script or the way it's presented, but I think like if you're turning in a comic script, it has to feel like a comic script. Like you have to be someone who's thinking about the images and the visual storytelling and spreads and page turns and making sure that you're not, you know, overwhelming a given page with text. That's a really big one. So a script from someone who clearly is thinking in terms of comics and is thinking about how this is going to be presented visually and is thinking about how this is going to be presented in like a print book form. I think that to me communicates like, hey, this person knows what they're doing, and it's going to be more likely that we connect with that script if you are just an author.
Yeah, and in regards to the artwork, it always helps to have some sample pages. I would say like 9 to 12 seems good, but you could do less. We were actually just reviewing earlier in the week an artist who's looking into it, that we're looking into having adapt a series for us, and they did a lineup of the characters that we were able to see and review, along with some rough sketches of the pencils for, you know, layouts of the pages, and it's an adapted work. So that was really useful, especially just having the lineup. Like you could, like the artist did a really great job, and you could see like just from this lineup, like sometimes they're like a little static, but they really managed to infuse a lot of energy into each one of the poses, and you kind of got a feel for each one of the characters' personalities, and they kind of nailed it right from the get-go. Like there were little things that we had made suggestions on, but that really comes in handy. And we were looking and considering a few other artists, and we kind of kept hitting walls. And when both of us, like me and the editor, when we saw this, we were like, oh yeah, this is good. And, you know, we were both really relieved, because we're like, we feel like this is gonna, you know, go places. So, and like even the rough pencil sketches were really helpful, because you could kind of see how they would solve the problem of adapting this text, and like what their layouts would be, and, you know, where the text would go and everything like that.
Great. So now we have a question that kind of goes along with this, and it's almost the other end of it, which is someone was asking how much of the graphic novel can be finished. So almost, is there too much? Does a certain amount need to be unfinished so that the publisher can edit of either sort of the script or the artwork?
Yeah, I think that the sweet spot for me feels like a chapter of finished art, and then the rest should be not finalized. The rest should be like, malleable. The reason, like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly a chapter, but Megan said earlier that like 20 pages of artwork is a good number. And, I agree with that generally because, you're showing how you can tell a story in the comics medium, but you don't want to overdo it with sort of the final art pages, just because those are obviously very difficult to go back and edit. And you want to make sure that the editorial and design staff have a chance to shape that project as it goes along. So you sort of want to give enough art that the person considering your pitch understands what's going on and can see your style and can see your storytelling technique, but not so much that it would feel onerous to go back and edit. You have to be really open to feedback when it comes to sort of those other parts of your pitch, whether it's your script or your thumbnails or your sketches. Like all of that has to be sort of ready. You have to be open to editing that if you're going to work with an editor, I think.
Great. Do you have any tips on developing a strong logline or elevator pitch? We had sort of people talking about that. And then going along with that, another question from the audience was, are there any buzzwords in pitches that make it seem too cliche or that you almost don't want to see?
I would say, I had a great conversation with an author this week, and I think a great way to create an elevator pitch is to try to say it out loud to someone you're close to. Because one of my authors said that he was saying this to his girlfriend. He was explaining his logline, his story to his girlfriend, and he saw a part where her eyes like glazed over. And he's like, and that was exactly the part of his story that he's struggling with. So I just think that is like just a great exercise to do to help you make sure that you're communicating your story clearly, succinctly, interestingly. That would be a great exercise.
Great tip.
I think that it's important to lay out exactly what the tension or the conflict in the story is. Obviously this doesn't mean that there's like a war or a battle, or like it doesn't have to be an explicit conflict, but an emotional conflict or an interpersonal conflict. Like it should be made clear like what the central question is in the story, and maybe what the protagonist is struggling against. Because as like a potential reader, if it's interesting enough and you're like, oh, I want to know if that tension gets resolved and if that protagonist, overcomes that, or if that conflict between those people gets resolved, and if so, how. So, yeah, I think like a logline that just sets the scene is maybe not quite appealing enough in general. Like you have to give us a sense of where the story is going to go and like what sort of ground it's going to cover, and that arc, if that makes sense.
Great. Okay. So we have another question from the audience. Speaking of close connections to schools, has the quarantine and not being able to do events like book fairs or school events or any of those strongly impacted Scholastic?
Well, fortunate at Scholastic, we have very creative clubs and fairs employees and teams in place. So they have come up with a number of innovative ways to respond to the school closures, to still have virtual fairs, other ways of distributing clubs titles. I mean, I can't really speak in detail of all of that because I don't work in clubs and fairs, but I know that like every employee who's working remotely, everyone thought on their toes very quickly and came up with a swift response to keep things going, keep systems in place.
Great. So another question from the audience, what upcoming graphic novels are you most excited to be publishing? If there's any you can either talk about or maybe allude to, not with specifics if they're not public yet.
So many. I had 2 recent announcements, so I feel comfortable speaking about them. The first is the 3-book trilogy that we signed up with ALA award-winning author Rex Ogle. It's a semi-autobiographical story about Rex Ogle. In case you're familiar, he's the author of Free Lunch. It was a nonfiction book that he had come out. But the story is about a 6th grader, Rex, and it's about his need of getting glasses. But he's also growing up in a family who lives below the poverty line. It has a lot of self-confidence issues, but we've kind of positioned it as like the smile for glasses. So we're super excited about that. And then the other one I'm super excited about, I mean, there's so many, but another one I'll discuss right now is a debut graphic novel by Zachary Sterling. It's called Mabuhay, and it's about a Filipino family and their food truck. And it also explores Filipino folklore, witches, mythology. It is so fun, and Zachary is one of the funniest writers I've ever seen. So there's so much to look forward in that one.
I'll speak to a couple. The first one is one that I mentioned at the end of my intro to myself, which is called Leon the Extraordinary by Jamar Nicholas. And that was announced on Publishers Weekly, I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks ago. So it's pretty fresh. But it's about a boy named Leon who lives in a world full of superheroes, but he himself is not a superhero. So it's sort of a bit like The Incredibles, but it's almost like a greater percentage of the population is super than in that movie even. And it's so much fun. It's so full of heart. It's got a great sense of humor. You know, I was just reading the latest pass from the author earlier this week, and I was just so engrossed and having such a good time reading. So can't wait for you all to dive into that one. It's going to be a little bit. It's currently slated for 2022, but you know, soon enough it'll be out there. The other one is coming out much sooner. It's one that Meg, Phil, and I all worked on together, which is Cat Kid Comic Club by Dave Pilkey. And that is sort of a new concept from Dave. It's a collection of, well, there is one running story that goes through, but there's also a bunch of mini comics in many different media, you know, pencil, marker, claymation, photography. You know, Dave really went to town and used a bunch of different media to tell that story. And we all worked really hard on it. I spent so many hours keeping track of all of these little baby frogs in the book. Phil's grinning because that was a thing. But you know,
it was a little painful.
Yeah, it was a little painful. But you know, but it's fun. It's so much fun to work with Dave. He, as I mentioned earlier, he's got such a great sense of humor, and he understands like the kid sensibility, I think, so well. So we're excited to see, you know, where this new series from him goes.
Great.
I actually have one that you can get now. It's Twins by Varian Johnson.
I can't wait to read that one.
Shannon Wright. Yeah, it's really amazing, and I'm so happy that it's out. It feels like that was one of the first books we kind of finalized during quarantine. It was like getting wrapped up in like March or April, and it feels almost like a weird dream. But then now it's out in the stores, and it's a really amazing book. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. You know, now it's out in the world. And yeah, and Cat Kid, that's coming out in December. I think it's the 29th, or maybe it's a little early. No, December 1st, I believe. And I actually have a preview copy here. Let's see. I think we can show it, you know, but yeah, there are the little frogs.
So there's
that we have
21 baby frogs, and they're all different colors, and they all have, you know, little identifying features like eyelashes or freckles. And so like keeping track of them all and making sure that they're colored correctly was like, it was an endeavor. You know, it's the sort of thing that like most readers may not even notice, but for us, it's important to keep that consistent and, you know, make sure that the standards for a Dave Pilkey book are very high. So yeah, as I said, we all worked hard on it and we're proud of it and can't wait for December 1st.
Yeah, and there's even, like, Dave did all types of crazy, like you can see here, this is a sculpture that Dave made out of action figures and created little comics for it. So yeah, it's really cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So looking even further to the future, what do you see as the future of children's graphic novels, the industry or trends in the actual books, either one?
I think the future more about not chasing trends. I think it's important for creators to create the stories that are meaningful to them, that share the story that they want to share. So I think that the future is unknown until the creators are making the comic books.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see more genres and stories and identities and sorts of readers being represented, and having books that mirror their experiences than we've ever seen before. I mean, you're already seeing in the publishing industry overall a push to really diversify, which I think is great, because there are a lot of readers that are still underserved by graphic novels and the book industry overall. So, I think more graphic novels that represent more experiences. And I spoke earlier about like the broadening of the age groups and seeing more kids graphic novels for younger and older than middle grade. I think you're going to see more of that, but just more variety of any kind, of every kind, excuse me. And right now graphic novels are almost treated like their own genre in some ways, which not a genre, it's a medium. But I think the publishing industry sort of loops in, or they lump in all graphic novels together in some ways. And it is treated as like a discrete category. And hopefully we'll get to a point where there's so many graphic novels out there that cover so much narrative ground that they'll really be like integrated with other books on the shelf. I mean, in my apartment, I have graphic novels all over my shelves. I don't keep them in one particular section. They're just all mixed together. And hopefully the more graphic novels that come out, the more like legitimacy the format overall will get, and it'll just become one medium among many, and a way that a place where any story about anyone can be told. So I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Well, then I guess I'm wondering if you have any final, we have people here who are interested in all aspects, I think, of the industry, from being readers to creators to people who want to work more on the publishing side of things. So do you have any final words or any final advice?
I could say just be persistent and, follow what you really are interested in. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like that's really the most important thing, because I feel like sometimes people just follow, like they'll be like, well, this is what I should do, and you just have to follow your instincts a little bit more. I know it sounds cliched, but I think that's important.
Great.
For me, I would say that it can come your way, but it may not be on the timeline that you're hoping for, that you're planning for. It might take a little bit longer. That was the case with me. I did not get my job right out of college. Like, I did grad school, I did more school, I did more interning, and then I got my job. But I got my dream job at the publisher I wanted specifically to work at. So it was definitely worth the wait for me. So I just feel like I don't think anyone should settle for something that they're not happy doing. Because I remember people saying like, oh, maybe you could take a job in marketing instead of editorial. And I was like, I don't want to be pigeonholed as a marketer. Like, that's not the future that I'm planning for myself. And I held out, and I had to like waitress while I was interning. So it wasn't very glamorous. It wasn't what I was wanting to do when I had a master's degree. But you do what you have to do. And that's what I did. And I think if you're tenacious and you're, like as Phil said, persistent, then it'll happen for you. So just don't give up. Don't lose sight of that goal and that dream that you have.
Great.
I actually worked in sports media for 2.5 years before I came to publishing. I have a very strange path into publishing. When I was in college, I thought I wanted to work for a Major League Baseball team, actually. So I did internships to that end, and I interned with sports companies. And I'm not going to say it was like a waste, because I think being an intern of any kind, you learn about how to be an office employee and how to work with a manager and cooperate with people. There are a lot of lessons I took from that were really helpful. But it's hard for it not to feel like a waste in some ways, just because a lot of publishing internships are open exclusively to current college students. So once I finally figured out I wanted to be in publishing, there were many opportunities that were already closed to me. But I was able to find like informal internship opportunities with a couple of smaller up and coming presses, one of which was unpaid and one of which was like very low paid. So I was doing my sports job and I was doing additional freelance work. There was like one point when I had literally 5 jobs before I started working at Scholastic. So I was very busy, but sort of like Megan, like that's what you have to do to pay the bills. But I tried to stay focused and I tried to spend all of my free time learning about comics, making comics, reading comics, going to comics events, because that's what I really wanted to do. And, you know, and then I was really fortunate that when an opportunity came along, I was well positioned for it. So I totally echo what my fantastic colleagues are saying. You know, you have to be really persistent and work hard and keep your eye on the prize and, you know, stay focused on your passion.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. And we also wanted to thank FIT for hosting, and particularly Dr. Brown and Dr. Milan for their support of this event. And thank you to Michael from Get In Tune for helping us out with it too. We hope that you'll join us throughout the rest of the weekend for more of our panels. And thank you for all your great questions during this panel. We hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you all.